in reference to the releasing of the different hormones within the body, whether you're dealing wherever you are in terms of the glands. The pineal gland being the uppermost, the topmost piece, coming down to the pituitary, and then you have the parathyroid and adrenal and all the other glands that you have. So there's a relationship that melanin has from the very beginnings of the organism itself. The zygote that forms into three different areas: the endoderm, the ectoderm, and the mesoderm, which basically is that round piece that later becomes the fetus. Melanin from the very moment of birth, in fact, is almost looked upon as if it is the organizing agent for all of the life that comes out of it. But there is another piece to melanin that I felt was very important that you had brought up the last time, and that is the psycho-spiritual dynamics of melanin and the role that it plays in terms of the human organism. Looking at the birth of peoples, the human family as we know it coming out of Africa, looking at the 6 different families of humanity that came out of its life history, beginning with the 2 Australopithecines. You had Australopithecus gracile and Australopithecus robustus. Out of this, the formation, the thought process of this human in developing him and herself then moved it to the stage of Homo habilis. Homo habilis being human of ability. This individual started to make tools, again, with the relationship of the sun to the human, the relationship of the light and heat energy to the pineal gland, began to sophisticate this human, began to have this human, African in nature, male and female, look around him and herself and develop a way of creating life, which brought them to higher levels of consciousness. Again, all of these activities, all of these experiences and insperiences is being recorded within the gene pool. So a human being walking the earth today by all nature should be carrying his and her collected unconscious. Every ancestor that you have ever had going back millions upon millions, if not there billions of years. Because when we get all of this together, we're going to go far back beyond what Western science is teaching us. When we look at African information, and I'm talking about African information not just in Kemet, it's so important to understand that in West Africa there were just as dynamic classical African civilizations in the Nok culture of Nigeria that were contemporary to the classical civilizations of ancient Kemet. We tend to think that all civilizations occurred at one point and that that's all it was, and Dr. John Henry Clarke teaches us, don't get caught up in Egypt. Don't get caught up in Kemet, because you're going to find that all of Africa had dynamic civilizations coming out of this relationship of melanin to the human organism, constantly perfecting, bringing them up to higher levels of thinking.
I think, though, that much of the focus as far as this information is concerned has focused on the Nile Valley cultures.
Yes, exactly.
And as you're saying, that there are parallel civilizations that express the same level of development that you find in the Nile Valley cultures. There is a question, and this has always been a question that I think a lot of people wrestle with, particularly in an environment where you still have a very strong commitment to religions and Christianity, particularly in the West. This whole question of the developers of the sciences, the mathematics, the different disciplines that have been handed down throughout the world, that coming out of an African origin and development. Dr. King talks about in chapter 1 of his book this whole issue of the black dot. The black dot being, as he puts it, a doorway to collective consciousness. What is he saying in a basic sense? So that, you know, a regular person can deal with the information.
As we go through this evening, I'm going to show you different illustrations, but one illustration that I'd really like to show, this comes out of Dr. King's book. This is showing basically where the pineal gland could be found in the head. What he's saying is that if you go to the center of your head, and you will see many peoples of Indian background, when I say Indian I mean from India, who practice a particular faith system, and you will see that they will have maybe a dot, a black dot in the center of their forehead, or they may have a gem in their forehead. This is representation of that particular doorway, that black dot, that entrance to the pineal gland, that light and heat energy from the sun directly comes. And as we go through the human forms of history, you see that as humanity began Homo erectus, in standing up, Homo erectus then created a straighter line that the sun would have directly to the pineal gland. Once stooped over, humanity didn't get the full benefit of the light heat energy. Therefore, consciousness rose, but it didn't rise at the level that once Homo erectus raised themselves, him and herself, the light rays had more of a relationship with the pineal gland, which then brought them to the Homo sapien, and then finally into the Homo sapiens sapien stage. The pineal gland is a very important gland in the body. Probably, even though the pituitary gland is considered the master gland, the pineal gland is almost the master of the master. It is the regulator of many of the important hormones, in particular melatonin and serotonin. And for those who are up on what melatonin is going on now in the country, you know it's a big thing. African folk process melatonin very freely. They have no problem, whereas peoples of a European background have a more difficult time in developing melatonin, which has to do with the sleep process, aging process, and the reproductive process, all three of which African folk really have no problem in. So the concept, and now they're getting into serotonin with women who are going through PMS, because they're really trying to offset the melatonin that everybody's overdosing on. Now they're trying to get to serotonin, which is released during the day. The pineal gland in the front would be right in the center. If you looked at the side, it would be right there. So therefore, practically speaking, if you were to draw a straight line right into the middle of your head, and then go into the top middle of your head and go directly down, your pineal gland basically would be the intersecting points, perfect intersecting points found in your brain. The importance of this, of course, is that in ancient Kemet and in ancient Ethiopia, in fact, in Ethiopia they had the double uraeus. The uraeus, of course, being the cobra, this snake being the wide. Now you can also find this in India, which clearly shows the relationship that India had, the Dravidian brothers and sisters had with their Kemetic brothers and sisters on the other side. So you can see the relationship by the nature of the symbolism that's carried from one area to another. Not to mention, of course, the animal itself is indigenous to Africa. It is not indigenous to India. It's indigenous to Africa, and it finds its way through migration to India, and then a particular brand, because of the environment over thousands of years, a particular kind of Indian cobra then is brought forward. But the pineal gland is represented in the uraeus as the protector. So that is why we have so many snakes here, because coming from an illustrative point of view, working with children and with adults trying to teach these concepts, I try to be as close to them as possible. So it's important that we look at the snake and the role that the uraeus played. Now, Dr. King also, in one of his chapters, deals with another very important symbol, and this is what we call raw light, raw bright. And we're taking a closer look at the concept of the pineal gland. But there's much deeper symbolism in this, and this is really what I want to get to. Because it is the pineal gland, as he says, it's the all and everything. And it's by means of this system of symbols that the story and the metaphor of the importance of melanin in the body takes place. It's not just practical, but it's also theoretical, and it deals with metaphysics. The way in which African folk would look at this, the scholars, they would take it into three ways. Number one, they're looking at melanin in a way to explain the purpose of the universe and how the cosmos came into being. They also know that this information responds to an innate need that humans have on the level of being a masterpiece or divinely conscious, to find the need to understand why they're in the cosmos in the first place. So this symbolism here shows the direct relationship that this information has to the pineal gland. In the first one, you have the uraeus. The uraeus is sending almost from its pineal gland into the first figure of the pharaoh or the human being, sending in light and heat energy into the pineal gland. So the Kemites had to have known the importance of the pineal gland. They had to have known its function in terms of what it released. They had to have known that it is melanin based, that in fact that it is melatonin released, and then a melatonin type base or a carbon based substance known as serotonin is released during the day. Melatonin is responsible for our dreams at night, and serotonin is responsible for our thoughts, our daydreams during the day.
I want to add to that point, because in going through the book, in preparation for the dialogue that we're having, there are some key things there that I felt was important to add in terms of the actual words that come from the book as we explain in practical terms. So I want to pick up on what you just said in terms of the African knowing the relationship. And this is from chapter